Welcome to this episode of Truth Seekers, where His Grace Bishop Emilianos of Meloa will answer questions sent in by the youth with a member of the youth.
All right, Maria, let's see what the question is here. How can we learn more about Christianity in an accessible way without having to do a theology degree to understand our faith? What do you think?
I think we're very lucky today to have access to so many different materials where we can learn about our faith and not have to go and get a theology degree. We can research online, look at the Archdiocese web pages, get an Orthodox study Bible, look at the footnotes, I find that really helps. Listening to podcasts like Ancient Faith Radio, contacting your parish priest and asking him if you have any questions. I'm sure they're not going to hesitate to answer and clarify things for you as well. Also youth groups, attending youth groups, listening to their talks, but also I find just meeting new people there that are like-minded, it's really helpful because they can also teach you a lot about the faith as well.
When I was a teenager, if I was to read a book that was talking about God, the Holy Trinity, dogma, I would not understand the word. I just couldn't. And of course, this was because I never thought that I would study theology myself. And later on, after spending a few years in the monastery, and after reading a little bit, and after praying all these years, it was very natural to understand what these books talk about in a way that I didn't even have to memorize things. It's like they were inside me. What I'm trying to get across is that how the fathers of the church say that if you want to be a theologian, you have to pray. Understanding of theology and prayer, they are very much connected. If they were not to be connected, or when they are not connected, things are very dangerous. For example, Arius was one of the greatest heretics ever, one of the biggest heretics ever, and he was one of the greatest theologians of his time. But I think that his life was not spiritual. He was not a man of prayer, and that's why he made conclusions about God the same way that a lot of denominations have done, and they have got our faith their own way. They understood things in a different way, the way that their brain can explain things. But if we are spiritual people, if we have a prayer rule in our lives, if we have a spiritual father, if we try to do all these things that you said, slowly we cultivate ourselves and we get to understand more and more and more. If we were to have a look in the history of the church and see the greatest saints that we have, like Saint John the theologian, Saint Simon the new theologian, Saint Gregory the theologian, but they all have one special characteristic. They got to understand God more than others. You don't call all the saints theologians, but just the specific ones. Mm-hmm. They got to understand God because they loved God more than others. For example, they say that Saint John the theologian was the beloved disciple. It doesn't mean that Christ loved him more than the other disciples. It means that Christ was responding to his love towards himself, which was greater than what others loved him. So St. John the theologian loved Christ more than others, and Christ as a mirror gave back more love, and he was his beloved disciple. So we see that there is a connection between this love and the gift of theology, and this is because whoever loves God will end up understanding God and then can talk about God. And this has nothing to do with theology studies. This has to do with our hearts. So it's very important that we have a life of prayer, of course, reading, of course, Bible studies, of course, CYC, um, of course, all these things. But what really matters is that our heart, as we say, it's in the right place, and that we love God. And then, if we love God, even if we never got any education like Saint John the theologian, we will still be able to understand God and talk about God, because God will reveal Himself to us. What do you think?
I think that it makes sense that you have to pray as well as try and do your research as well. Obviously not at a college or anything like that. But it makes sense that they go together.
And that's right. What I said is not to say that we should not study theology.
Mm-hmm.
But what I said is that the question was, how can you learn about God without studying theology? Mm-hmm. So you give your heart to God and you pray and you establish a connection, and then you understand God from within your heart, not from knowledge that comes from books.
Would you also say that even just going to church every Sunday, really practicing the divine liturgy, that in itself is a good way to learn about our faith as well?
Of course. And even just looking around the church, what happens? Mm-hmm. They say that the wall paintings, the icons, they are the gospel of the ones that they don't know how to read. Because back in the days, people that they could not even read, they would see a depiction of something, a miracle. And this is like reading the parable, it's like reading the chapter of the gospel that talks about that. Mm-hmm. We have to understand that there is a reason why the church exists, and the church exists to save everyone who enters the church. And it's a safety, it's like Noah's Ark. Why would you go swimming when you can save yourself from the thunderstorm if you're in this ark? Why would you risk your soul?
Definitely agree with that as well. I think it's easy to sort of, if you just say that you love God and you're not attending, church services regularly, things like that, it's easy to get lost in your own thoughts and sort of do what you believe is right. And it's easy to sort of go astray that way. So we do need to attend church and read the scripture as much as we can, because it reminds us and it refreshes our memory on what we believe in and what to do in certain circumstances. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Maria. It was lovely having you here.
Thank you for having me.